For 7 nights in a row, a strange blood-red bus would stop right in front of my house at exactly 3:33 a.m. This was odd because Frost Hollow, like most American towns, didn't have any public transportation. What made it even stranger was the people who got on and off the bus. They were all very tall and thin, and their faces were just blurry, flesh-colored shapes. On the morning of the 7th day, I decided to call the sheriff's department. I didn't know who else to talk to about this weird bus. A woman with a thick southern accent answered the phone. "Good morning, Sheriff's Office. How can I help you?" she said slowly. I hesitated because I didn't know where to start. "I'm not sure who to call, but there's a bus that stops in front of my house every night at 3:33 a.m. People get on and off, but they look strange. I live on Slaughterhouse Road, past the abandoned school. The bus only comes after 3 a.m., and there are always people waiting to get on. Can you help me?" The woman was silent for a long time. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Finally, she said, "We don't have any buses going to Slaughterhouse Road, sir. There are no buses in town except the ones for public schools. Maybe it's a private company. Did you see any logos or numbers on the bus?" I thought hard. Yes, on the side of the bus, it said Inferno Express and the route number was 666. I heard a few more seconds of silence, then she hung up. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I needed proof of this mysterious bus, so I decided to investigate. At 3 a.m., I put on a black long-sleeved shirt, black sneakers, and black jeans to blend in. I grabbed my digital camera and stepped outside. The night was warm and humid, with a gentle breeze. The air smelled fresh, like summer, but my heart was pounding. It felt like I was about to do something terrible, not just watch a strange bus in my backyard. I quietly crossed the road, noticing that my neighbor's house windows were dark. The street was mostly surrounded by woods, with a few houses scattered around. I found some thick bushes near the street to hide behind, making sure I was far enough away to stay hidden, but close enough to see clearly. I checked my watch. The minute hand was moving closer to 3:33 a.m. This was my last chance to leave if something went wrong. My anxiety was rising, and I was sweating a lot. I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself. Suddenly, I heard the loud rumble of an engine approaching. Without wasting a second, I pressed the record button on my camera and started filming myself. "Hello, my name is Landon," I whispered quickly. "I've been living in Frost Hollow on Slaughterhouse Road. For the past week, a bus has been stopping at my house every night at 3:33 a.m. The people on it are very tall and thin. I'm recording this in case something happens to me." The brakes of the bus screeched loudly as it came into view, stopping just a few feet away from where I was hiding in the bushes. The bus was bright blood red, and its windows looked like sideways eyes, long, dark, oval shapes that glowed eerily in the darkness. I made sure my camera was still recording, hoping the people on the bus couldn't see the small red light on my camera screen. The front door of the bus opened with a loud screech of rusty metal. Inside, a bright, fiery light filled the bus. All the strange, eye-shaped windows shone with a bright red glow, making long shadows dance down the swampy area in front of me. I saw the driver, a tall man in a black suit with white buttons and shiny boots, almost like an old-fashioned uniform. His head was bone white and almost reached the ceiling. His two black eyes were big and lidless, like those of a creepy praying mantis. They were almost as big as oranges. I gasped as he turned to look at me, wondering if he could see my camera. To my horror, the answer was yes. Moments later, tall, faceless silhouettes stepped off the bus, appearing in the bright red light. I zoomed in with my camera, trying to see their faces, but they were smooth and featureless. Their arms hung down to their feet, and their long, twisted fingers looked like gnarled tree roots. They wore orange jumpsuits, like prisoners, and their smooth, hairless skin rippled as if they were breathing through it. A few of these strange creatures walked into the woods and swamps, going in different directions. One of them moved toward a neighbor's house, creeping around the side with exaggerated, eerie steps. It looked into the windows with its blurry eyes and tried to cover its face with its long fingers, as if to block out the non-existent sunlight. It was like these creatures only knew human movements from stories. They wore dull black shoes that were twice as long as normal human feet. The bus stayed in front of me, its engine loudly idling and the door hanging open. I saw the driver pushing himself up from his big chair. He moved forward, bowing his smooth, hairless head as he left the bus. Like the other faceless creatures, he tiptoed forward in an almost childlike way. His black eyes glittered, and he looked completely insane. He kept his arms raised, moving his claw-like hands back and forth with each exaggerated step. I realized with fear that he was coming toward me. Moments later, he was right in front of me. His eyes looked even more excited and crazy than before. My heart was racing as I looked around for a way to escape. The driver's face, smooth and white, grinned with a psychotic gleam. He pushed through the thick bushes at the edge of the road, never taking his eyes off me. At that moment, a fear I had never felt before shot through me. I stumbled to my feet and turned to run blindly into the forest. But behind me was a muddy swamp. As soon as I took a step, my foot sank deep into the earth. Brown water covered the mossy ground, and it collapsed under my weight. I tried to pull myself up, but my arms swung wildly as I almost fell into the foul water. Suddenly, a hand grabbed me by the back of my neck, pulling me back. The hand was burning hot, like the flesh of someone with a high fever. My camera slipped from my hands and fell into the swamp with a wet thud. "Get off me!" I screamed, trying to break free from the strong grip. I was still facing away from the bus, but I felt myself being pulled backward. I stumbled, my foot catching on sharp rocks and roots, but the hand didn't let go. It just kept pulling me back up. The fingers dug into my flesh, causing me agonizing pain. I felt small drops of blood running down my back and neck as we reached the pavement again. The driver threw me hard in front of the bus steps. I felt my skin tear along my knees and elbows, feeling all the cuts and bruises I had gotten. I slowly raised my head, blinking my blurry eyes. Through the open door, I saw the enormous driver's seat empty. It took me a few moments to realize what else I was seeing. The steps were covered in human bones, arm and leg bones placed side by side, covering the entire surface. Many were yellowed and cracked with age, but others looked fresh, smoother, and whiter. The driver's chair was even more horrifying. Hundreds of grinning human skulls made up the seat, rising up to the ceiling. Human skin covered the front and seat, pale and leathery, with countless human teeth sticking out. The roots of the teeth were embedded in the soft flesh, rising up to the top of the bus in crisscrossing patterns. I looked back at the driver, seeing his thin body looming over me. One of his long arms pointed at the open door of the bus, reminding me of the grim reaper showing the way to the recently dead. He stood there without speaking, his eyes glittering with madness and a rough grin plastered across his smooth white face. "No, I don't want to," I pleaded. "Don't make me get on it." "I'm sorry," he replied. "I'm so sorry. I should never have come out here." The driver stayed still, like a corpse with a grinning death mask. I saw movement behind him and realized two tall, faceless humanoids had appeared in bright jumpsuits to board the bus. They came up beside the driver, their blurry heads bowing down to look at me. If they could see me without eyes, I wasn't sure. Suddenly, the two humanoids moved forward, their thin arms reaching out to me. I tried to crawl away, but moments later, they wrapped my wrists. Their skin felt burning hot and feverish as they lifted me up. I tried to scream and call for help from my neighbors, but no one came. They pushed me through the door into the fiery red light inside the bus. Every seat was filled with tall, skinny people with smooth faces. Their skin rippled and distorted when I tried to look at their heads. The two creatures holding me forced me toward the back. There was a boy, about 10 or 11 years old, sitting alone and looking terrified. They threw me into the seat next to him and walked away. Immediately after, from the front of the bus, I heard the doors slowly closing with a squeal of rusty joints. The driver was back in his seat, staring into the rearview mirror at me, grinning. "How'd you get here?" the boy asked in a small, shaky voice. I turned to look at him, amazed. His pale skin was a stark contrast to his dark eyes and black hair. He had high cheekbones and a slightly scary look. I don't know. I was kidnapped. What's going on? Who are these people? Where are they taking us? I whispered, constantly looking up to see if we were being watched. But the faceless humanoids stayed still in their seats, their blurry heads pointing straight ahead, completely frozen and unmoving. Only the driver showed any signs of life as he put the bus in drive and slowly started moving forward. "They're taking us to the Playpen," he said. "They showed it to me in my dreams. I used to see these people looking in my window at night, people without faces who were really tall and skinny." The boy continued. "I told my parents about it, but they thought I was just having nightmares. But when I fell asleep, they showed me everything." "Okay, so what is it? What did you see?" I asked. His face went pale. He just shook his head. "I don't think you really want to know," he answered. "Both of us will be there soon enough, and then you'll see for yourself." I found out the boy's name was Ian, and I told him mine was Landon. He said he was from the other end of Frost Hollow and had been on the bus for days without food or water. "It circles around to different towns," Ian whispered. I looked out the window and saw a dark desert all around us. Sand dunes swirled on both sides of an endless highway. I hadn't noticed when the world outside had changed from forest to desert. "Those things without faces," Ian said. "They come into people's houses, get inside their heads and their dreams. They make you think horrible things. They used to scream at me that I needed to kill myself." "I call them the stalkers," I said listlessly, still staring out the window at the shadowy, endless dunes. "We're not getting out of this, are we, Ian? I mean, alive?" "Probably not," he replied, his voice sounding hopeless and dead. On the horizon of the dead, dark desert, a black monolith rose high into the air. It looked like a lighthouse but had no windows. Its outer walls were like polished obsidian or onyx, rising hundreds of stories into the cloudless sky. The bus started slowing down as crimson lights lit up overhead. I realized that all the stalkers had turned their blurry heads to stare straight back at me and Ian. The driver also kept looking at us through the rearview mirror as the bus came to a stop at the Playpen. A robotic female voice spoke calmly through speakers built into the walls. The door at the front flew open, and everything went deathly silent except for the engine idling. "I think they want us to get out," Ian whispered nervously as he slowly got to his feet. I wanted to say no and fight back, but with dozens of faceless stalkers staring at us in their eerie frozen poses, my courage failed me. On unsteady legs, I got to my feet and followed Ian down the walkway. The faces of the stalkers turned to follow us, seeming to blur and ripple with excitement. I wondered what would happen once we got outside, but I had no idea of the horrors ahead. As I stepped onto the inky pavement of the street, I realized the desert felt freezing cold. Winds swept across the dunes at a tremendous speed, and clouds of dark sand obscured the black sky. The bus doors stayed open, and all of its passengers watched us with interest. The driver never took his eyes off me and Ian. "I want to get far away from these creepy stalkers. Let's go," I said over the roaring winds, putting a hand on Ian's shoulder. He flinched, looking small and scared. Side by side, we started walking down the road. It wasn't long before we found our first body. A mummified corpse lay on the side of the street, its dried flesh sticking tightly to the bones. Its eyeless sockets stared straight up, and its open mouth looked like it was frozen in a silent scream. A black hole filled with sand. Ian gave a strangled cry as he saw it. Falling back, "Hey buddy, it's okay," I said. "It's just a dead body." He shook his head, pointing vigorously at the desiccated corpse. I followed his finger and saw something odd happening. The corpse began to shake and rattle, its limbs splaying out and jumping up and down. The ragged strands of cloth covering its chest and legs ripped apart with a soft tearing sound. Wet, black tentacles covered in dozens of eyes rose up, snapping apart the remaining bones and flesh with ease. The ribs jutted up like spikes, and something hellish slithered out. It rolled on its tentacles, a ball of slithering limbs covered in something slick and shiny. It was the size of a small dog, but as it sped out, its width and height doubled. It had no head or central mass, but its many eyes constantly blinked in chaotic and random patterns. The eyes looked blue and very human, bloodshot and dilated with fury. "Get away from it," Ian screamed with a terror I had never heard in a child's voice before. He ripped at my arm, pulling me back. I stumbled, nearly falling as the tentacled creature slithered toward us at incredible speed. Its many eyes focused ahead, insane and furious. As we turned, I glimpsed stalkers watching us from the sides of the street. Their blurred faces stayed hidden in the sandstorms blowing past, but I saw their tall, inhuman silhouettes in the darkness. They reminded me of spectators watching gladiators die in the Colosseum. "What is it?" I shrieked over the roaring winds. "What happens if it catches us?" Ian was breathless with terror. "Sprinting ahead of me," he said. "He's a very fast kid. Don't let it catch you." He screamed back, and I realized the monolith stood ahead of us, only a few hundred feet away. A powerful surge of hope filled my heart as I saw a massive doorway filled with white light. But as I got closer, I felt something warm and slick wrap around my ankle. I screamed as I fell forward, seeing Ian disappear through the doorway. His silhouette was sharp and clear for a moment before the white light swallowed him up like a hungry mouth. "God damn it, help me," I cried, crawling toward the white light. I kicked and struggled against the tentacles wrapping around my leg with a grip like squeezing metal bands. I dragged my hands through the sand as I felt myself being pulled back. My head smacked hard against the pavement. Stars danced in front of my vision in the gloom and darkness as I swam against unconsciousness. I saw more stalkers always watching from a distance, their flesh rippling with excitement at the thought of witnessing imminent death and dismemberment. More tentacles wrapped around my waist, and I looked back only inches away. Furious, dilated eyes stared back at me, and the tendrils reached toward my mouth as others held my head in place. I didn't know what they would do once they got inside me, but I instinctively knew it would be horrible. I heard a loud shout, and felt something smash into the creature on my chest. The tentacles suddenly retracted from my face and head as the eyes turned to look at whatever new threat had arrived. A thin man with a long beard and haunted eyes stood above me, holding a homemade stone club. It looked like it was carved from sandstone, the end formed into a jagged point. The tentacled creature hissed like a snake as the man bashed it again. Finally, it mercifully released me. I rolled away, coughing and sputtering. "Run, you idiot!" the man cried, smashing the creature through one of its many eyes with the sharp point of his club. The eye exploded in a shower of black blood and viscous fluid. The creature's hissing turned into a distorted wail that split and echoed like hundreds of voices screaming at once. Shell-shocked and terrified, I scrambled to my feet and sprinted the last few steps toward the doorway. I looked back to see the man running behind me, the tentacled creature hissing and gurgling as it chased us. Together, we fell through the doorway of white light. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the creature stopped. Its eyes furiously blinked and glared, and a few heartbeats later, it rolled away, its silhouette disappearing into the shadowy doom outside. "Well, that star spawn almost got you," the man whispered, clapping me on the shoulder. "Good thing I was coming back this way. I went out hunting." He showed me a dead rattlesnake slung around his back. "I'm Teddy," he said, reaching out his hand to me. I only stared at it, and he let it drop after a moment. "Star spawn?" I asked. He nodded eagerly, his brown eyes gleaming. He looked extremely thin and malnourished, and the clothes he wore were frayed and falling apart. "How long have you been trapped here?" I wondered aloud. "That's what we call them," Teddy answered. "They come off the black god. Parts of his body sometimes fall off when he's sleeping, little parts here and there, but they regrow into those things. The star spawn. If they get their tentacle down your throat, it's game over, buddy. A little piece of them breaks off and starts growing in your stomach, eating away at your organs and muscle until it decides to break through. It's not a fast death either. You might be in excruciating pain for weeks before it kills you." I looked around the room in the black tower where we stood. It was a massive chamber with gleaming obsidian walls that surrounded us, extending up dozens of feet to a flat black ceiling. A bright spotlight pointed down at us, illuminating the room in white light. Stairs made of the same stone spiraled up the outer perimeter of the chamber, disappearing into a gap in the ceiling. "My friend came through here," I asked. "Do you know where he is?" I asked Teddy. He shook his head. "What's your friend's name?" "Stranger," he replied. I laughed uncertainly and introduced myself. "Well, he's got to be upstairs with the other one." "The other one?" I asked. Teddy nodded. "We're not the only refugees here, Landon. The bus brings more victims all the time from all over the world. A lot of them don't last long. The star spawn often get them, and if they don't, the stalkers hunt them down and torture them to death. I've seen a lot of bodies skinned alive, people who got caught by the stalkers." "Well, let's go see them," I said. "I want to make sure he's okay. He's just a boy, you know." Teddy looked at me grimly. "He's not the only child who's been brought to this place," he answered. "I've seen more corpses of children here than you could possibly know." I walked up the stairs with Teddy at my heels. As we rose through the gap in the ceiling, we entered an even larger chamber that rose thousands of feet into the air. At the top, I saw something massive and black with thousands of tentacles. It stuck to the flat ceiling, slick and wet. Countless enormous eyelids covered its limbs, tightly closed as it slept. Drops of slime occasionally fell from its body, landing on the floor with soft patterings. I saw an old woman sitting next to a small fire with Ian by her side. She had a rattlesnake on a spit and was cooking it. Ian had a leather satchel of water in his hands, which he drank from thirstily before passing it back to her. I remember him saying he had been trapped on the bus for days, I thought. I wonder if he had any food or water that whole time. I walked forward, waving and smiling, feeling much more hopeful seeing Ian alive and well. I glanced nervously up at the tentacled monstrosity, uncertain of whether I should be afraid or not. The old woman whispered, "Do not wake him. We must escape before he awakes." Teddy said furtively, putting a calloused hand on my shoulder, "We are going to try to hijack the bus. It is the only way between worlds. If we stay here, we will all certainly die, including the boy. It's only a matter of time. But if we can kill the driver, what about all the stalkers?" "It's not just the driver," I asked. "Whatever is on the bus, the black god is far worse." The man whispered. His sleep becomes more troubled as time passes. We see his tentacles twisting with his nightmares. Once he awakens, those nightmares will spread throughout the playpen. Right now, we are only hunted by the star spawn and the stalkers. I met an old man who saw the black god awaken. The old woman said, "When I got here, he was still alive. Every few months, the black god comes alive to feed, and he said that the corpses walk. When that happens, the dead scream, the sky rips apart, and everything moving gets hunted down like vermin to be absorbed into the black god's flesh, where they live for weeks, being slowly digested and driven insane by the pain." "So how did he survive?" I asked. She shrugged. "He hid in the bus. The driver gets out sometimes to hunt, and he snuck in. The black god missed him, but he was the only one." I found out the old woman's name was Jackie. Like Teddy, she wanted to get out of the playpen immediately. "The stalkers and star spawn won't come in here," she said. "They're afraid of the black god, and rightly so." Teddy muttered, "It's suicidal to be here. That thing could wake up at any minute, and we'll be the first one sucked into hell if it does. I've heard the screams of people being eaten by the black god's flesh, and it sounds like they're being burned alive. They went on for weeks, months," I said. "Stop it," Jackie insisted. "You're scaring the boy." I looked over at Ian, seeing she was right. He looked ready to pass out, his skin turning chalk white. Jackie pulled the roasted rattlesnake off the spit, ripping it apart with her hands and handing pieces to Ian and Teddy. She looked at me, her wrinkled face crooked. "Do you want a piece?" I shook my head, feeling slightly nauseous just looking at the dead, burnt snake. Its head was still attached to the body, its open eyes blackened and staring. "So what's the plan here?" I asked. "How do we get back?" Teddy looked at me, chewing a mouthful of rattlesnake. He lifted his homemade sandstone club and then nodded past Jackie. I followed his gaze, seeing a few more primitive tools. "That's it. We're going to bludgeon the driver and all the stalkers and steal the bus." Teddy nodded. "You have a better idea?" "I did not," I replied. The four of us went back out of the stone monolith that held the black god, seeing the endless paved road disappearing into the horizon. Armed with the primitive stone tools, we walked side by side, constantly scanning the darkness for enemies. "There are bodies everywhere," Teddy said over the roar of the wind. "Most of them have star spawn hiding inside." I wondered how often the bus came this way, but at that moment, chaos broke out. I saw the star spawn with one punctured eye rolling furiously down the pavement. I pointed and screamed when something ran into me from the side. I fell hard into Ian, knocking both of us down. We went sprawling in the sand as two stalkers stood overhead, their insane faces blurring and jerking from side to side. Their arms were long and twisted, sharp fingers jabbing down at my face. In a blinding moment of absolute panic and agony, I felt them puncture my left eye. I screamed, jerking back as they ripped and crumpled my eye. It exploded with a powerful jet of blood and viscous fluid. My vision went white with agony. At that moment, I saw headlights through the haze of pain and terror. In my shell-shocked state, I barely realized it was the bus speeding down the road. The small star spawn hissed with animal hunger before a tire ran over it, causing black blood to explode from it like a water balloon filled with sludge. Teddy came behind the stalker, bringing his heavy stone club down on the back of its head. I heard a wet crack of bone as it fell limply on top of me, its fingers still clutching my dismembered eye. I realized the optic nerve and blood vessels were still attached, running along a few inches from the mutilated socket. I pushed myself to my feet with a rush of adrenaline, feeling the vessels rip apart like snapping string. I nearly passed out, but Ian and Teddy came to my sides, each putting a steadying hand around my back. The bus stopped in front of us, the door shrieking open as the first of the stalkers descended the steps. I heard a primal scream from behind us, from the direction of the monolith. I looked back in terror, seeing the top of it explode in a shower of volcanic stone as massive tentacles, hundreds of feet long, reached blindly out. The black god pulled itself up like a colossus sitting atop the world, its many gigantic eyes glaring down. "It's starting," Teddy screamed. "We need to get on that bus now." Staggering, I watched the three of them run forward. I followed behind, feeling weak and sick with my one remaining eye. I saw the driver descending the stairs, his black eyes bulging as he stared up at the sky. I realized with horror that the clouds had started to rain fire. The flickering flames lit up the world as the black god roared with a primal scream. Teddy ran forward, raising the club to strike at the driver casually, almost lazily. The driver raised one hand, grabbing Teddy by the neck and lifting him off the ground. His sharp fingers stabbed into Teddy's skin and flesh, digging deeply as Teddy gurgled. He weakly brought the club down as the driver threw Teddy's broken body to the side of the road. Teddy twitched, suffocating on his own blood and seizing. I watched his eyes roll back in his head as Jackie and Ian ran at the driver together, closing in on him from both sides. Ian struck at the long, emaciated leg under the black suit. The driver slashed at Jackie's face as bone cracked under the weight of Ian's blow. The driver buckled as his leg gave way, his furious, lidless eyes turning toward Ian as he fell. He reached forward, dragging the boy down with him. I saw Jackie on the ground next to them, with deep stab wounds eating through her eyes and into her brain. Blood spurted from her still body. I stumbled forward, raising the club and bringing it down on the back of the driver's head. His head collapsed as he clawed and stabbed at Ian's face and neck, opening up his throat in an instant. I heard gurgling and weak cries as I jumped onto the bus, sickened by all the blood and death. I ran up the steps, never looking back, bleeding heavily, my vision turning white with pain. I started the bus. The engine turned on immediately, rumbling powerfully. I had never heard such a sweet sound in my life. I began driving ahead down the freezing dark streets of the Playpen. I felt my hands sticking to the steering wheel, my skin covered in gore and clotted blood. I glanced in the rearview mirror and had to repress an urge to scream. Every seat was filled with stalkers, their blurry faces looking straight ahead. Their long, mannequin-like bodies twisted and jerked like a single hive mind. They rose up ahead as the dark street disappeared into a spiraling vortex, the color of fresh blood. I accelerated, pushing the bus as fast as it would go, afraid to look back to see what the stalkers would do. I drove through the vortex, pushing the bus up to 70 and 80 miles an hour. The blinding torrents of crimson light dissolved to reveal my street, Slaughterhouse Road. I slammed on the brakes, glancing back to see a stalker only inches behind me. Its twisted fingers reached out to grab me, their heads jerking from side to side, blurring and jumping. Their arms seemed to vibrate with seizure-like movements. I heard a cry, like one voice, a sound of anticipation and bloodlust. I opened the door and fell out of the bus as sharp fingers clawed at my head and scalp. Fresh blood ran down my face as I crawled across the pavement, screaming and crying. Thankfully, one of my neighbors heard me and came out, shining a flashlight in my bloody, mutilated face. Soon after, I lost consciousness. I remember waking up in the hospital, but my nightmares were always of the Playpen and the Black God, and I think they always will be.